Welcome to grade 8. Today I will be taking your class from the English textbook lesson 1, that is the best Christmas present in the world. Author is Michael Morpurgo. Michael Morpurgo is an English book author, poet, playwright and lyricist. He is best known for writing children's novels such as War Horse. His work is noted as magical storytelling for frequent themes such as victory or survival of an outsider, for characters' relationships with nature, and for vivid settings such as the World War I. Morpurgo became the third Children's Laureate from 2003 to 2005. Introduction. No one wants a war. Nobody likes to fight in a war. If two nations can sit together to find a solution instead of fighting with each other, that could save a lot of life. And that's exactly the thought that has been reflected in this story, The Best Christmas Present in the World. Objective. There are some dates or periods of time in the history of the world that are so significant that everyone knows and remembers them. The story we will read mentions one such date and event, that is, a war between the British and the Germans in 1914. Characters are Jim Macpherson. Jim Macpherson was the leader of his English troop. Before getting into war, he was a school teacher in Dorset, present in the west part of England. We found him brave and courageous as he was leading his troop. He was kind and open-hearted person as he shared his time and happiness with enemy army, also a loving and caring person due to his love and affection towards his wife shown in the letter. Connie Macpherson. She is the wife of Jim Macpherson. After her husband went to war, she spent her whole life in a belief that she will see him again. A fire broken in her house burnt her partially. We found her extreme love for her husband. Hans Wolff. He was the captain of German troop. He worked in an orchestra in Dusseldorf before the war. He was friendly as he first insisted make friendship with English. He also had love for football and adventurous mind. Now the first part. So let me tell you about the story that we are about to read. It is one of Morpurgo's stories with the backdrop of World War I. Part 1. In part 1, the narrator of the story went to a junk shop and purchased a roll-top desk which was in a bad condition but cheap. He thought that he could restore it, so he bought it. He began to work on it on Christmas Eve. He pulled out the drawers. He found that these had been badly damaged by fire and water. The man who sold it had told him that it was very old and it was of 19th century and made of oak. The last drawer had stuck fast. He had to use much force to open it. When it opened, it revealed a secret space. In it, he found a small tin box. On the top of the box, these words were written: Jim's last letter, received on January 25th, 1915. To be buried with me when the time comes. Inside, there was an envelope with the address Mrs. Jim McPherson, 12 Copper Beaches, Brightport, and the date was December 26, 1914. Now in part 2, the author read the letter. The owner of the desk must have put it in. The letter had been written by a captain of the English army. His name was Jim McPherson, and he had written it to his wife Connie McPherson. A wonderful incident had happened on the battlefield on the Christmas day. Jim McPherson had narrated it in his letter about an unforgettable moment, and that was the English and the Germans were at war. The two armies stood in their respective trenches on the two sides of the no man's land. Suddenly, McPherson saw someone waving a white flag from the enemy side. Then he saw many German soldiers calling out to them. They were wishing a happy Christmas to the English soldiers. Some English soldiers shouted back, "Same to you." The English thought that was all. To their surprise, they saw many Germans moving towards them. The captain was alarmed. It could be a trick, but it was not. They were bringing with them German wine and canned meat. Now there were no rifles between the soldiers. They were hugging one another. The German officer moved towards McPherson. He shook hands very warmly. Then the German officer said that he was from Dusseldorf and that he played cello in the orchestra, and he gave his name as Hans Wolf. In return, McPherson also introduced himself. He said that he was a school teacher from Dorset. Hans Wolf smiled. He said he knew Dorset. In fact, he had never been to England, but he knew English. His favorite writer was Thomas Hardy. His favorite book was Far from the Madding Crowd. It was from there he had learnt all about Dorset. McPherson shared with Hans Wolf the Christmas cake his wife had sent for him. Hans Wolf said that the marzipan was the best he had ever tasted. It was a wonderful Christmas party. Then a soldier brought out a football. The soldiers played while McPherson and Hans Wolf clapped and cheered. Hans Wolf suggested that the world would be much better if the problems were resolved by a football match instead of war. After the football match, all the drinks and eatables were consumed. Now it was time to part. Hans Wolf saluted McPherson and walked away slowly and unwillingly. That night the Germans were heard singing a carol. The English soldiers replied with a rousing chorus of another carol. They exchanged carols for a while, and then it was all silence. McPherson wrote in his letter that he would treasure those moments all his life. McPherson ended the letter hoping that the war would end soon. Both armies longed for peace, and he was sure they would be together again. In part 3, the author read the letter and put it back in the envelope. He decided to give the letter back to whom it belonged. The address was of Brightport, Dorset. So he drove to that place. The house number 12 turned out to be a burnt out shell. It was found that Mrs. Macpherson was in the house when it caught fire. The fireman had got her out just in time. She was 101 years old. Now she was in a nursing home. The author went to the nursing home and he met the matron. She told the author that Mrs. Macpherson was rather confused that day. They had put her in a conservatory room. The author found Mrs. Macpherson sitting in a chair. Naturally, she looked up at the author vacantly, but her eyes lit up when he called her Connie and gave her the letter. He told her now he had got the letter, but she was not listening to him. She reached out and took his hand. Her eyes were filled with tears. She felt that her Jim had returned. She said that her Jim had kept his promise. He had returned on the eve of Christmas. She made him sit beside her and she kissed his cheek. She talked long and lovingly to him. She said that she had got the best Christmas present in the world. Moral of the story is, war brings death and sadness. There are much better ways of resolving differences. Thank you, children.